All right. Welcome, folks. I appreciate you taking your time out of your day to join us. As people are starting to filter into the room, I will take a little time here to introduce, what we're doing, kind of some of the housekeeping things. Welcome to our November Ask Mayfield Anything. We're going to be talking about NEC updates for the 2026 code cycle and really focusing in on the PV side of things. We're going to jump at it. We're going to spend most of our time in 690 today, but we have a little bit in 705 because we've got some good questions about that. So we'll cover those as we're going along. Um, Excited to have folks here and excited to have Sean White joining us here today. So we'll do introductions here in just a second. As for folks that have joined us in the past, this is it's called Ask Mayfield Anything. We love to get questions, so encourage people to use the Q&A function of the webinar feature here. So if you have a question, feel free to drop that question into the Q&A. We will do our best to get to those questions. We had some pre-submitted questions as well, so we're going to try and filter those into the conversation as we're going along. So yeah, using the Q&A is the best way in order to make sure that you get those questions and we're able to see them. So lots of stuff to cover here today. So I'm going to kind of roll through and get us going here so we can jump into the meat of the topic here. And real quick, for folks who don't know Mayfield Renewables, we are a technical and we're an engineering consultancy where we spend a lot of our time on project engineering work. And so we're consulting with EPCs, developers, folks like that, and doing project engineering. So designing electrical plan sets for solar and solar plus storage projects. So something that's a big part of what we do. It's a large portion of the company and the employees that we have. Other part of what we do a lot of is education and training. So things like Ask Mayfield Anything, we spend a lot of time putting out content in various forms. Really enjoy engaging with the industry, enjoy doing classes, things like that. So glad that you're here joining us. We do have some classes online. I'll point you towards those towards the end of the class. And we have, again, lots of content. Take a look at our website, our LinkedIn channel. We keep things posted quite regularly. So that's another big part where my passion really lies and what we get to do here and work with folks out in the industry. So real quick, I'm going to do some introductions. For those who may not know me, my name is Ryan Mayfield, founder of Mayfield Renewables. And I started the company 2007, been in the industry since 99. And so I started off as an installer, kind of worked my way up through the ranks, if you will. And at this point, one of my biggest feathers in my cap that I like to talk about is being on code making panel 13. So I'm an alternate on the CMP, and that specific panel, amongst others, but Article 706 is in our purview. So that is, the energy storage system article. We have others that are in the 700s and things like that. So been a enjoyable experience. I'm glad I got to do it. And the 2026 was my first code cycle. So excited to jump in for the 2029, which we'll talk a little bit about, just to give you a little preview about that. We also have Sean White today. This is the first time Sean's joined us on one of our episodes. And so really excited to have Sean, well known in the industry. So I'm not sure you need a huge introduction here, Sean, but I'm going to turn it over to you and let you introduce yourself to the folks that are out there in the audience.
Thank you so much, Ryan, for letting me be on your Ask Mayfield Anything. My mom's maiden name starts with an M, so if my parents didn't get married, I could do AMAs too. So I'm just glad that you let me be on yours. I was remembering when we first hung out, and I think it was when we were on the 2014 Mike Holt video for
I think that's
the
probably
NEC.
correct.
And
Yep.
I had some, yeah, we have a mutual friend there, Dave Click, and we were riding around in the car together. And I have some good memories from that. One of them was the night before we're going to go out there and do our recording, Bill Brooks and Mike Holt were arguing over where to put the overcurrent protection device on a feeder for Article 705. And that was when they first came out with these new 705 feeder rules and all that kind of stuff. And so it's kind of funny how like you get like the top experts in the world and they're arguing over how to do it the night before the video. And I think actually the argument wasn't even fully settled then. And they decided later, probably even years later, that you could, put the overcurrent protection device 25 feet away from where the connection is, but maybe we'll look at that a little bit later. And
Yep.
let's see. Oh, and some other things too is like, do you remember that time when we were sitting there and we were talking about 690 47D? I still remember, and Mike Holt made a video about that. And he goes on some rant because he really hates accessory electrodes. And we were just all sitting there, just kind of nodding, while he was like, "This should be taken out of the code right away."
I
I,
do remember that. It's probably still on YouTube. So for folks out there, if you want to Google, yeah, that was it's an interesting 10 minutes or so. So
yeah,
that's a good
yeah,
one.
and you can see myself and Ryan, and I think Bill Brooks, Jason Fisher, Dave Click,
Yep.
um, and we were all just sitting there, kind of like nodding when he was he was going off. 690 47D for danger, I think is what
That
it
was
was
exactly
called.
what he said.
Yeah. And so, but yeah, I wanted to thank you again for having me
Yep.
here. And it's an honor to be on your show. And if people want to find me, you can go to SolarSean, that's SEAN.com. And Ryan and I also teach classes on HeatSpring. So cool.
Yes.
I was glad.
Absolutely.
I was glad
Yep.
when you showed up there, like being
Yeah.
on the same team. So great.
Exactly. Yep.
Mhm.
And we'll have contact info for people towards the end as well. So really appreciate you taking the time, Sean. Yeah, this has been a long time coming. So today we're going to talk about the 2026 NEC and specifically around PV systems. And as we've already alluded to, talking about the Article 705, there's a change. Got a couple questions from folks, so we want to make sure that we cover that as well. So that's what we're gonna where we'll spend our time today. So real quick, just a little bit of heads up, or just for some awareness more than anything, talking about the adoption of the National Electrical Code. And this map is the most recent that the NFPA publishes. So they periodically update this. I'm not sure if this is on a set schedule or not, but nonetheless, big takeaway here is different jurisdictions, generally at the state level, not always, but generally at the state level, are going to adopt NEC and the code cycles on various timelines. So 2026, Massachusetts is probably one of the most notable states that will, on January 1st, the NEC, the latest version of NEC, will be in effect in Massachusetts. A lot of other places where I sit in Oregon, for example, Washington, it's very common that we have specialty codes similar to what California does, but those are adopted at a later time. So typically summer, fall of that year. So will be when those are adopted. So this is just more of a be aware if you're in those locations, just kind of those adoption rates. And then, of course, California being the biggest of the well, one of the biggest states and a large solar installation state, they are a full code cycle behind. So come January 1, they'll be actually adopting the 2023 code. So that's just a function of how they run their codes. Um, Anything to
Yeah,
add
and it's
there on
also
that one, Sean?
it's also interesting that NABCEP is on the 2017 NEC, unless you're taking the energy storage exam, and then they're on the 2020 NEC.
I did not know that. Interesting. So sounds like yeah.
The
Um,
state of NABCEP, yeah.
yeah, just it's hard to stay on top. I mean, there's changes and you got to dedicate the time and effort. So I get it.
Yeah.
And there's even some
Another thing,
states.
another thing that's kind of funny there is Indiana. They're on the 2008 NEC, but for utility scale energy storage, they adopted 855. And as far as I know, that's the only place that's
Oh,
adopted 855.
well, that's good to know. I didn't know that there was any. So that's good to know on that one. I'm gonna use that one in when we start talking about 855 in the future. Okay, the slides, this is just a heads up for you in the audience, a layout slide. So how we like to present the material here, we will often show the code language and we'll show the code language in italics. So you get to see that actual language. I generally prefer not to try and shorten it or just try and abbreviate it at all. And so that's the code language. When you see it in italics, that is the language straight out of code. The highlighted sections is there to do exactly the way it does in code, and that is to indicate there was a change from the previous version. So in our deck today, we're going to be looking at the 2026 language. So if you see a highlight, that means that was changed from 2023. Kind of worth noting that sometimes you'll see highlights and it's maybe an organizational change. It's maybe not even word changes. So be cognizant of that when you are going through and reading the code, that the changes are, sometimes they look like there's a lot of changes, and sometimes it's really more organizational. And then finally, new code language will have an N in parentheses highlighted yellow as well, or in our case yellow, and in the code book it's highlighted gray. But it'll be highlighted to just indicate, hey, this is a new section for that. All right. So 2026 general updates. Sean and I were going through this when we were doing our prep, and you know what it feels like as we were going through. There's plenty of things that there are some changes. There's plenty of highlights, and you're going to see that as we're going through. But one of the things that it kind of felt like as we were preparing for this is we're not seeing these big wholesale changes like maybe we've come to grow used to in Article 690. And so it feels like there's more clarifications than changes. So it almost feels like that's a good thing, in my opinion, that our PV systems are mainstream enough, or we've been doing it long enough to where we're tweaking things and we're getting things better in the code, but it's not necessarily we're adding a brand new section like we did back in when we added everybody's favorite rapid shutdown. That was, kind of a mind-blowing, just big thing to get used to, and it took a few cycles to kind of get it right where we're not moving it around a lot. So that was one of the big things I noticed in the 26 code. Sean, what did you notice kind of in the kind of more of a general term?
Yeah, I went there and I read it from end to end, 690, and it was, I just like you said, there wasn't as much as I'm used to, like that many changes. It's kind of hard to find them sometimes because you're looking through and there's a lot of changes in the wording, and there's a lot of places where they'll send you to a different section, like they'll consolidate something and send it to 705, but there wasn't a whole lot of changes. And I guess probably what it has to do with is PV changed so fast. And we had the 2017 NEC that had PV on the cover of it. It's like we won. PV is most of the new energy that's put on the grid in the world, and we're successful. So congratulations.
Yeah, no, that's yeah, maybe congratulations are in order. So yeah,
We've
feels
made
good
fossil
and seeing
fuels are now alternative energy. Yeah.
that. Well, we are the fastest growing, right? And added the most capacity in the last. I don't know what the timelines are, but that's always good stuff. Actually, I did before we go into the specific one. I'm going to go backwards, folks. There was a question here that I thought was a good one to because it's kind of a general question. It's not anything specific, but so the question was: do any of these new changes affect who is permitted to do electrical versus mechanical tasks in solar construction projects? If so, can you elaborate a bit? So this one, that's going to be more of a jurisdictional question or more of a licensure type question. So National Electrical Code does talk about qualified persons being, installing, but it doesn't get into the mechanical versus the electrical so much. And of course, being the electrical code, that's what the focus here is. And so I would kind of defer that one a little bit, just saying that's really a licensure question. What does your local jurisdiction, what licensing do they require, if any at all? And those licenses can dictate what you can do as far as a mechanical attachment versus electrical. And so that's that, case by case basis, I guess you could say. Where I'm at in Oregon, we have specialty licenses for PV systems specifically. It's a license that I actually have kept active. But other states, California has their, Sean, you probably know better than me, the C40, is that the right one? Or there's
Yeah,
two of
the
them?
solar's a C46, and now they're
46.
saying it doesn't work for batteries, but they're in court with the
Okay.
California Solar and Storage Association. And I have one of those, a C46, and then a C10. You can also,
Okay.
that's an electrical contractor's license. Then
Yeah.
there's like the journeyman. I think the C10 is more like a what people call a master electrician.
Okay.
And then there's like the journeyman, the average person out there twisting wires. And then there's the question is like, can you have somebody else that you're supervising like do stuff? And so is that person qualified? I know they're in Chicago, they amended the National Electrical Code to require, or they said that qualified person in this context is somebody that's like a supervising electrician or being supervised by a supervising electrician, which is
Oh, okay.
kind of hardcore because most places they don't really define it. I mean, like the NEC doesn't define it. And I kind of look at it as it's like, well, if you know your stuff, no matter who you are, you're qualified. Like it's not, there's probably some electricians that are not qualified to do solar because they never studied direct current or,
Right.
and they,
Right.
they learned how to install plug sockets 40 years ago,
Yep. Yeah, and that's where licensure can fall flat a little bit, but it's the system, I guess, that you could say we have to work within. So, but yeah, that's hopefully that helps on that question. All right, let's jump into some specifics here on the changes that Sean and I kind of went through and kind of picked out what we thought were, you know, significant and things that people want to, highlight and flag for their own knowledge. So first one here, we have fractions of an amp or volt, and we have this, permission now to round nearest whole number, round down to the nearest whole number when it's, less than 0.5. This has been one there. This similar provision is it 220? I'm pretty sure it's 220. It's branch circuits. There's something very similar to this. And people would try and apply that to our PV circuits, but PV circuits aren't branch circuits. And so it was like, I see the point and I see where you're going with it, but it's really not appropriate because we're not talking about the same types of circuits. So we had some jurisdictions that would say, yeah, I agree with you, go ahead and round down. Others would be like, nope, 30.1, you're over 30. That means you're 31 volts or 31 amps now. So this is just that allowance. Kind of been I don't know, when I see spec sheets like this and this, what you're looking at here is a short circuit current from a PV module, 11.74 amps is what we have highlighted. That second significant digit's kind of, I don't know, unnecessary in my opinion to begin with, but we do have this ability to do these whole rounding to the whole numbers, which is helpful for overcurrent devices and when we're doing those calculations and things like that. I'm sure you've seen
yeah,
that
I've
quite a bit, Sean.
Yeah, and I've thought of a way to be devious with this, to
Okay.
find like a little loophole. So let's say that you had a microinverter that had a current of 1.4999999 amps, and then you put 100 of them on like a subpanel breaker or whatever. And so that 1.49999, that could be rounded to 1. And then if you had 100 of them, you could be using 100 amps instead of essentially 150 amps. Haha. Not that
Wait, you're
anybody
saying
would
take
do
the
that or not.
199 and round to one?
Well, if you took 1.4999,
Oh, 499. Sorry,
yeah,
I misheard you. I'm with you.
uh,
Okay.
I was
I'm
saying
with you.
nine
Because
too
it's,
fast. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
then
Because it's less than the point 0.5.
yeah, and
But
so maybe like they could say next time around or something like the end calculation or something like that.
well, and that's actually a question that just came in. It just, rounding concurs after calculations. And so we do see that on the right in the text or in the codes, calculations shall be permitted to be rounded down. So I would say that after you're doing whatever calculations are required for your circuits, then you can round it down. But in your situation, if it was 149,999, then we're going to round it to one, and then um, subsequent ones would be like that. So um, that one might be a little tough though, Sean. If
Oh
you
yeah,
have
I'm
that
sure.
many,
I
you're doing
know
a
that it's not intended for that, and it could be dangerous and all that, but I just,
yeah,
thought it was.
yeah. So calculate, and that's a pretty big one right there. Calculations shall be permitted. So what are those calculations? Well, it depends on what the circuit is and what are we doing voltage. So it'd be for the temperature. Are we doing current, so we, conduit fill and all those things, and temperature as well. Cool. So
Yeah,
this is
like
one, again, it's been there. People have been trying to apply that 220, and it's great that we got that in there in order to finally get some clarification. This is one, Sean, actually, you pointed this one out to me as we were going through, since you read it end to end and were so diligent about it. So this is one that people are probably familiar with, circuit sizing and current 690.8a. And what you'll notice if you read through this, again, that's a lot of text. I'm not going to read that to you, but the calculation of the current, so that's what A1A is talking about, is we're going to calculate the PV source circuit current, and we have multiple ways of calculating that. And so one thing that people are used to seeing is for large systems previous to 2026, 100 kilowatts or greater, we have this ability to use electrical engineering, industry standards to calculate those values. Well, what we see here in this, when you read through this, is that 100 kilowatts has been dropped. And so this is one that you pointed out to me, Sean. Is that something that you've talked to some people about, or where
no,
did
I
you
was
pick that?
just I'm writing a book and I got through chapter 690 and I noticed that and I was like, huh, there's no 100 kilowatt. So now we could do that with our microinverter circuit that has 1.4999 amp microinverters and,
So,
and
so
really
yes.
save some copper, you know. Yep.
And the reality of it is, even at 100 kilowatts, is it how much are you going to save? It's in there's
Yeah,
probably
sure.
something to be saved there, but your minimum wire sizes are probably, you might not be gaining a lot, I guess is what it comes down to, even on a 50 kilowatt system or something like that. So,
Do, do you see yourself using this even when it's over 100 kilowatts very often?
um, I wouldn't say I wouldn't put it in the very often category. We definitely do, and it's been requested. And when we go through and do our engineering work and um, doing those calculations, it's something that we have done, and it's been a request. Generally, it's on the much larger projects, because reality is, even on a 500 kilowatt project or something like that, again, your minimum wire sizes, and a lot of times what we're doing is we're running small conductors to begin with, um, because we are doing string inverters. And so by the time we get to those large circuits, because we're talking about these PV source circuit currents, so that is the DC side, those are the PV circuits. So I would say it's not overly common, but it's definitely something we have done. And I think the bigger the cables get, the bigger the systems get, the more it gets scrutinized, and the more people are willing to spend that time on the engineering on that upfront.
Yeah, and they recommend using the Sandia model. It's an informational note here.
Yep.
And I guess they call it the David King method sometimes because I think that's
Okay.
who wrote that Sandia model. And I
Hmm.
know that what Bill Brooks told me is that if you do see somebody that's using 70% of the otherwise calculated current,
Hmm.
that they're probably using a wire that's too small. Like that's just
Mm.
like the bottom limit. But if you really did the calculation, it would be bigger than that.
And that makes sense. And so, yeah, so that last number 3B there talks about, you can't have the current value can't be less than 70% of what you would have calculated it back in A1, A1, A1. So basically the 125%. So that's a good point. Going through and actually doing the calculations, and it does have to be documented and stamped. So, an electrical engineer is going to have to look at this and put their stamp on it so that it carries some liability. And most engineers aren't willing to stamp something that's questionable to begin with. So I haven't seen that 70% value actually get used. So, but that's an interesting point, that that it might be you're borderline on too small a wire to begin with.
And one of the reasons why they might be reorganizing the code next time is look at how long this is. It's like A 690.8 A1 A3B. Like including the parentheses and everything, that's a lot of keystrokes.
Yep.
Hmm.
That was actually, I think we skipped right past that. Or actually, maybe it's in our closing. So I've been telling people as we've been getting ready for 2026, I'll say it now since we're brought it up. 2029, there's going to be a major reorganization of NEC. And if you are a person who has never memorized code sections and all that kind of stuff, there's no time, no reason to start now. And if you have memorized things, I'm sorry to say that they're going to be gone. So the numbering system's going to change, the organization's going to change. The code will still be there and we'll still have the language, but it's going to look and feel very different come 2029. And it's a intentional change by NFPA to kind of match more international codes and should be in the end more efficient and a better methodology. But it's going to be honestly, it's going to be painful and hard to change after we've been using it this way for so long.
Yeah, so that's a goodbye to 690, and I counted 42 of them from 1985 until 2026.
Okay. So 690 is no longer going to be a thing, but that's okay. We'll still have our PV circuits. All right, let's keep moving, getting to the bottom of the hour here and kind of covering some more of these things. So here's another one. You see a lot of changes here, and Sean and I decided we wanted to talk about this one. Not huge changes, and actually, when you look at it, there's a lot of highlight there, and really, this is one kind of gets back to your last question, Sean, of how often are we actually using this or seeing this? And I would say this one's relatively minimal. And I have a image that we will show that kind of helps show kind of what we're talking about with the circuit and things like that. But 690.8a2, this has been in the code for a few cycles now. And what it's doing is it's talking about if we're terminating on electronic power converters. Not something you're going to find defined in Article 100, and it's a pretty generic term. It could be an inverter, it could be some sort of other piece of electronics. It doesn't have to be an inverter, so it's this generic term that we're connecting to. But what the gist of this is when we are sizing our conductors to on the input of these electronic power converters, historically, we've had to take these theoretical values from the PV side and multiply it by 125% for our edge of cloud effect and things like that. Have to multiply it by 125% again because we have continuous duty ratings that we have to apply. And so everybody in the industry knows 1.25 times 1.25 equals 1.56, this magical 156% value. And what this was doing was getting us away from having to do that in all cases. And again, this was really limiting us or allowing us to size our conductors for more of a realistic value of what's actually going to be carried inside those conductors as opposed to these theoretical values. And this is one I'd be curious, Sean, how much you see people are out there when you're talking with people, utilizing this one. Again, I'll show the image in the next slide, but for us, it's pretty minimal just because of the types of installations that we're seeing and the types of inverters people are using.
Yeah, I don't see this very often, but I think it's kind of cool. It's sort of like how regular electricians do electricity. So you have like this huge current source and you put on an overcurrent protection device and so this one requires an overcurrent protection device before your EPC, your
Hmm.
electronic power converter, and then it protects it that way. So let's say that PV keeps going down on price until it's 1 cent a watt, and we'll just have these 3-to-1 ratios, and then we could just clip, and we could have like full inverter power at 8 in the morning in the summer.
Right, right. 1 cent a watt. I'd love to see that one.
Yeah.
Real quick on this, on the exact language on this one here is, again, Sean, you just mentioned it. We have to have that number one. We have to have the EPC protected at the source. So the source in this case would be our PV system. We have to apply the circuit calculations in 690 the circuit complies with the overcurrent protection requirements in 690.9 and the calculations in 8. And so we have to make sure that we are doing that. But then the other big one in number one, and I think this kind of gets lost in the weeds or in the kind of all of everything else a little bit. EPC is protected at the supply with an OCPD not exceeding the conductor ampacity. So that's one that, when we go and we're applying conductor rules and we're looking at Article 240, for example, we have some allowances. We can actually protect a conductor that has an ampacity less than what the overcurrent device is rated for. I'm sure Sean and I have both covered that a lot in different forums. I'm sure there's information out there for people. But this is saying that you can't have the overcurrent protection device exceed that conductor ampacity. So that's just a difference there in how we apply the general rules for this very specific application.
Well, I think that way makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah. When you tell somebody you can have a wire that's only rated for, you know, whatever it is, 95 amps, but you can put it on a 100 amp overcurrent device, that seems a little backwards, but code allows for it. But in this situation, that would not be allowed.
Yeah, I tell people when they're doing that and they find out that they can have an overcurrent protection device greater than the ampacity of the wire, that once they understand that it doesn't make sense, then they understand.
Well, we have so many safety D rates in there as well. But the beginning ampacity of that wire is probably just fine to begin with. But
Yeah.
maybe that's a bar at the or a talk over a whiskey or something. So here's that image I was referring to. And so when you're taking 8A2 and you are trying to apply it here, we have our PV array. In this case, we have a PV combiner box, and you can see we have an overcurrent device for the source of that circuit. And the circuit we're referring to here is from the PV combiner to, in this case, the inverter. Probably could call it an electronic power converter. So it's an electronic device. In our case, it's an inverter. One of the reasons why we don't see this a lot is because of the fact that we don't see a lot of DC combiners out in the field anymore. We see a lot of those DC combiners being built into the inverters, and so you're running these small conductors into the inverter, and there's just not a lot of play for you in this case to downsize those small conductors. If you are aggregating, if you are combining your DC circuit, there's an opportunity here to reduce that wire size. And like what Sean was saying, if you have so much PV on the input, you have maybe you're doing a 2-to-1 DC to AC ratio, that the wire between that combiner box and that inverter, if you apply the conventional methods, that wire is going to be much, much larger than if you were to apply this 8A2 application, which will ultimately save you a bunch of copper and a bunch of money, depending on how big your system is.
Yeah, and those modules being 1 cent a watt, I have this theory that since they stopped making pennies, that pennies are going to be the new currency. They're going to be worth more than $1.
I like where you're going. I like where you're going. But do we have to round up or round down on this? That's the big question.
Yeah, I guess just to the nearest whole penny.
There you go. All right. So we're moving right along. Encourage folks again, if you have questions, feel free to pop those into the Q&A section. Love to engage with folks a little bit more. So disconnecting means this is one where this is actually one that I feel like, and Sean, I'd love to get your input, your take here is, I feel like the last number of code cycles, we've seen a fair amount of reshifting and all that kind of stuff on disconnecting means. And, we see system disconnecting means, we see equipment disconnecting means. And we're not going to necessarily take our time to dive into those so much, but this one was interesting in the sense that we have PV 690.13 is for our PV system disconnecting means, and you see the change there that shows that we're going to install those in accordance with 705.20. This one's kind of, if nothing else, an interesting thing that we are talking about PV system disconnecting means, and we are going to interconnected power sources, a completely different article, to tell us how to install those disconnect means. On some levels, it makes sense. I mean, this is a power production source. The PV system is. We're talking about the system disconnecting means. So, not a huge leap, but it's also just a change from what we've seen in the past.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I always thought was kind of against solar was that we can't just use a circuit like we have anti-islanding. We can't just use a plain old circuit breaker for a disconnect in a lot of jurisdictions. In some places you can, but it just seems to me that it would be like fair because with anti-islandings we're just as safe like an air conditioner. That when you cut the power with a breaker, that's good enough. And instead of requiring these like visible knife switches and all that kind of stuff, which is a lot of extra money to throw around. And we need to be more competitive than ever now because of the political climate and all that. So I think that's what one of the things that I think about disconnects. Like,
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. And so, yeah, and we've had that big fight over the utility interact or the utility, disconnects at the meter locations, things like that, which a lot of utilities still require. So, um, but yeah,
yeah,
that's definitely been a difficult one.
and perhaps here too, it kind of, I don't think this really changes anything, but clarifies things that a single disconnecting means shall be permitted to disconnect multiple power sources. So
Right.
you have multiple power sources connected together. Like at a sub panel, you could just cut the sub panel. You
Hmm. Yes. And so, yeah, so I think there is some good clarification here and that highlighted section in the middle talking about, a single disconnect meeting multiple requirements, which I feel like I've been saying for years, if you have a single disconnect and it can do multiple things, that you can do it. Had never heard an interpretation otherwise. So nice to see that that's in the code. I either verifying what I've been saying for a long time, or maybe I was ahead of my time. I don't know. But
know,
nonetheless, it's
or
nice to
both.
have that in
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I'm sorry. Go ahead, Sean.
Oh, I said, were you ahead of your time, or I just said both, but
Oh, okay, okay.
yeah, I was complimenting you.
I'll take it. Thanks. Um, cool. And actually, a question that just did come in before we go away from disconnecting means it's adjacent to that. So, are surge protectors required on newly installed PV systems? Um, I don't know of that. Sean, can you speak to that? I would have to go look that up. I just don't know that off the top of my head.
Surge per newly installed PV systems? Um, no,
Not that I know of.
there's no requirements for surge protection for PVs.
Yeah. Okay. I didn't think so, but I didn't want to say so with confidence without looking it up. But that was my gut reaction on that. So I don't recall ever seeing anything along those lines. All right, wiring
Not
methods.
not to say that it's not a good idea or it might
Oh,
be required in Florida or something like that.
no, that's a good point, and that's actually a worthwhile thing to point out that um, we have codes. We have electrical code. We have codes of all sorts, but in this case, we're talking specifically electrical code. And you install your system to code. That's great. I've always liked to say that good for you. You get a C minus if we're grading you because it's you did the minimum, right? You installed a safe system. It's free from electrical hazards. That's absolutely what we need to be doing. But there's always going to be industry best practices. There's always going to be ways that you can go above and beyond, and things you can do, extra protection devices you can put in. And so definitely something that, if you're in an environment where, hey, surge protection would be good, lightning protection would be good. I personally live in an area where, I've seen exactly one lightning damaged PV module in the entire time I've lived here in Oregon for over 20 years. And so, not a big thing for us, but you get down to Florida, that's a quite different thing.
Yeah, the same thing goes with lightning protection. It's not covered in the NEC, but it would be a good idea in
Right.
certain places. Yeah. I
Right.
believe like there is an NFPA standard. I think it's 780 for lightning protection.
There's definitely a standard. I don't know what it is. I like to, feign
So
ignorance on that one and just lightning's a whole other thing. If and there's people who specialize in it, and that those are the people you should talk to when it comes to lightning.
Yeah, and there's like NFPA has a ton of standards, but just because they made some standard, you don't have to follow it. For example, NFPA 855, it's pretty much the same thing that's in the IRC, International Residential Code, or even more so the IFC, International Fire Code. And it kind of just repeats stuff with different words. And I think adopting something like that, where there will be a couple things that are different, just makes things confusing.
Sure.
Mm.
Yeah. And on that last question, I see that in the chat or in the Q&A, we actually got a couple people chiming in. So thank you very much for the input. So, and yeah, and a little bit of just validation, no requirement for surge protection device, but it is required if you modify the main service panel. So that was where my mind was going. Is like I know there was something in there about surge protection. So if you're doing main service upgrades, things like that, if you're touching that, so that is one. And then there's another one that talks about somebody mentioned in the IEC standards. So the number that Sumanth, pardon me if I mispronounce your name, gave us is IEC TR 63227. So there's an IEC standard. So IEC is not necessarily, enforceable here in the U.S. Unless it's been adopted as such. But there are some standards out there to go look at. So I'm just seeing this question on the disconnecting means, so I'm gonna kind of come back to that. So on the prior disconnect question, we have a couple of HJs, especially the fire department, not allow for the ESS manufacturer integrated disconnecting means, typically an actuator contactor method, and require a separate knife blade that, in our opinion, is safe or effective. Have you experienced, or what are your thoughts? So, okay, so that's specific to, you mentioned energy storage systems. So I'm going to make just a blank, just going to talk about, step away from PV for just a second here. Energy storage systems, they do have disconnecting requirements. That's in 706 15-ish. Sorry, I just delivered a class yesterday on it and we talked about it a lot. So it's in that area. But I think the thing that you are referring to here is, well, one, I guess the question is if it's a residential versus commercial. But in the 2023 code, there is a requirement that we cease the power from operating. It can be done a handful of ways, and it has to be outside and readily accessible. So I guess not knowing a lot of the details on your question, using a knife switch to turn off the ESS may not actually be the safest method because that would mean you're bringing typically power to that disconnect and then running it back inside the house would be a pretty common scenario, which isn't necessarily what you want to be doing, bringing that power out and then to go back in. So I would say that you're probably onto something in terms of either them misinterpreting or requiring some things. But 706 is where I would, point you to and seeing if you can work with your AHJs on that. I don't know if you have anything to add quickly on that one, Sean, since it's ESS and not what
Yeah,
we were really talking about.
I just think that it sure would be nice if we could get all the AHJs together to require the same thing instead of every AHJ say, I'm smarter than all the rest of them out there and I have my own special way. And it just brings up, it makes everything cost more because we have to like do things so many different ways in so many different places and add all these knife blade switches.
Yep. Yep. Cool. I see a couple questions about interconnections and relating to 705. We have a slide at least coming up on that because we had some pre questions before the webinar even started had sent in. So we'll definitely get to our 705 stuff and can add some color to that and hopefully some clarity. And if there's other questions, people are, obviously more than welcome to join in on that. But we'll get there here in just a second. So conductors of different systems. We haven't talked about this. I was about to go away from this slide. The conductors of different systems. This has been in the code for a long, long time. And if you read the language, again, you see number 4 there. There's a lot of highlight. There's indicating a lot of change. And really, the big thing I always like to, when I'm in a live class, I always like to ask the question and get people to raise their hand or see if I can start fights or arguments or whatever. But question being, can I put my DC circuits in with my AC circuits in my, for my PV systems? And the question is, well, yes, but it kind of depends, and there's some requirements around it. And so you can see that charging language on number one there, or that top level language, talking about how, it's DC circuits. The way that it's written is interesting. So it's a negative in the sense where it says shall not occupy these other non-PV systems. And then it says unless you do the following. And it gives us a list of things how you can do it. And so typically, what you're going to see is partitions, grouping, identifying the conductors of the different systems. And so adding a partition inside of a gutter, for example, is a way that people most often will do this. Putting a partition inside of a circular raceway, probably not going to happen. So putting, the DC and the AC in a pipe, not so much. Putting the DC and AC inside of a gutter, inside of a wireway, much, much more likely. And the ability to do that. So that's kind of just that charging language. And then Sean, you would this was another one that you pointed out to me. So we get into this number four. So 1 through 3, those are encourage people to go read those. And but number 4, it's talking about the multi-conductor jacketed cable with a jacket insulation rating equal to the maximum circuit voltage. So I think this was where you were saying that the language changed a little bit, where previous versions, it wasn't necessarily the jacket rating, but it was the individual conductors rating. So if you think about it, a jacketed cable, there's individual conductors inside that jacket. And the language seemed to at least point to the individual conductors having that voltage rating, not the jacket itself. Did I encapsulate that one right?
Yeah, I think what's protecting you there is the jacket, and we're
Right.
looking at pretty much something like an Ethernet cable, like a communication cable. And you have these little teeny tiny wires in there, and you're not going to get those things rated for 600 or 1500 volts or whatever it is. So it's just the jacket, the outer jacket that has to have that voltage rating. And once again, I think it just clarified things, or maybe there was some inspector at some AHJ in this country that wanted somebody to have like a 1,000 volt rated little, 18 gauge wire or whatever it was inside of that
Hmm. Right.
Ethernet cable.
Yeah. And just to kind of cap that point, so the big thing here is when you're putting in these conductors of different, the different systems or the different types of conductors in, we want to make sure that they are protected properly. And so if you're running 1500 volts circuits because you're running a ground mount PV system and you want to run other cables in there, then even if they're separated by a partition, you need to make sure that the voltage rating of all those conductors is at least 1500 volts. If it's 600 volts because it's a residential application, then 600 volts. And so I think that's one, people maybe overlook. The example you gave on the communications cable is good in the sense that we're running an Ethernet cable or we're running some sort of communications in there, and it only has a 100-volt limit or 200-volt rating or something like that. So making sure that your conductors are properly rated is an important aspect of utilizing this exact code section.
Yeah, and I think the last time around too, we're like putting different types of conductors, DC and AC and everything together was a little bit more confusing because it started off saying like you can't do this, and then there was these exceptions, and now it's a little bit more clear because like when you just read the first part, it's like, oh, you can't do it. And so
Right.
I think it's a little bit more clear this time around.
Sure. Yep. All right. Last two that we have, and we're doing pretty well on time. I thought that we would just be talking way too much here, Sean. So we're doing really well. Look at us, keeping track of time and moving through our topics here. But last two, the last one especially, might take a little extra time, so that's totally fine. Um, Wires and cables. So 69031. we are talking about our conductors that we are, installing for our PV systems. And 69031C gets into the exact types of conductors we're using. And when we're installing single conductors, so we're kind of just diving straight into C1 to talk about single conductors. So we see there that we have this permitted in all locations where RHW-2 is permitted. That's been there for a while. And we have this DG cable, distributed generation cable. That's a listing for a specific type of cable. And it's, just calling out that TC tray cable. We're basically making them equivalent there. The thing here that we were wanting to talk about is this single conductors exposed and supported in the number one there, cable ties that are listed and identified for securement and support in outdoor locations. And so I think this is one where kind of like a well, of course kind of thing that you would fully expect to have in there. But I think, Sean, you've been, looking at systems for a long time, talking to people on installing these, and the securing of our conductors, the wire management of our conductors is probably one of the biggest um, uh, difficulties, I guess you could say. One of the maybe the worst part of a lot of installations when you go and look at them and either do a post go look at it as a installation inspection or something like that. It seems like that's been just historically a hard part for the PV industry, and so having this calling out listed and identified for outdoor locations, put it in the code, that's great, but it's like one of those things that probably should have been there all along.
Yep. And
And I got a
we have to
question.
support them every 2 feet.
Right, and we skipped past that just out of the interest of time, but there are, depending on the size of the conductor, I think the 8 gauge is the cutoff. 8 gauge and smaller, larger than 8 gauge, there's different spacings that you have for how you are supporting those different conductors.
4.5, which is the old, yeah.
4.5 feet, is that what the
Yeah.
larger than 8 gauge, is that what it is?
Yeah.
And there's a question here. What is this new listing for cable ties? Is there a standard? I don't think it's a new listing. I think this is just saying it has to be listed for outdoor locations. So I don't believe the way I'm reading that is it's not saying that there is a new listing, but rather that it just needs to be listed and identified for the securement and support in outdoor locations. So outdoor rated cable ties really is what we're talking about. And I don't know what that number is off the top of my head. All right. Here is probably the number one question we were getting before and now during this talk. And so let's spend a few minutes here, Sean. We've got some time, and jumping out of 690, jumping into 705. So 705 is interconnected electric power systems, and actually I probably memorized that wrong. So again, don't memorize code language, just go look it up when you need it. But nonetheless, this is when we're interconnecting power production sources with our primary power source. More often than not, that's the utility. Not always, but that's just kind of the default. But what we wanted to point out here is 2026, there's a going back to 2020 language is really what it comes down to. So for folks who are, familiar with code, have been working for a while, in 2020, we had a limitation for our systems that are interconnecting on the supply side of the service disconnect. So that's what we're showing in this picture. So maybe even step back even further. And what are we talking about with 705.11? Source connections to a service. So we are making a PV system connection to the supply side of the main disconnecting means. In this case, we have a small residential type application. We're doing a supply side connection. People like to lovingly refer to them as supply side taps. I try and avoid the tap language just because it inadvertently sends you to the wrong code section sometimes. But we have a limitation for that conductor length. In 2020, we had this conductor length limitation. 2023, if you look at 705.11, there was a pretty big move to have 705.11 just really refer back to Article 230 and Article 240 quite a bit, so services and disconnect or overcurrent protection, and not kind of repeat the code is really what it was trying to do. So, and in that change from 20 to 23, we lost this requirement to have a conductor length of a certain value. 2026, it's back, is kind of what I'm here to tell you. So, if you are doing supply side connections in a residential application, you have to keep that conductor length to less than 10 feet. So, you go from your connection point inside the main distribution panel there, you're going over to the PV system disconnect. 10 feet is your length. If you are in other than dwelling units, you get up to 16 and a half feet for that. And I truncated the code language in my notes, so I'm going to have to go look at it in 2020. And Sean, maybe you can confirm or deny this for me if you know this off the top of your head. In 2020, well, in 2020, I know that there was an allowance to go even further in non-dwelling units if you had cable limiters installed at that 16 and a half foot mark. And I believe that's back in 2026. So you can go further, but you just have to have extra equipment, cable limiters installed in order to properly protect those conductors.
Yeah, that's correct. And I believe that the cable, let's see, the cable limiters, um, trying to think that it's kind of crazy because it's metric now. So they have all
Right.
these weird numbers like 71 feet, I
Right.
think is how far you can go with the
Because
cable
that's 20
and
meters or something.
yeah, something like that. And what is the one that's in between? What's that the distance? Let's see, it's 10 feet for residential, which is a nice
5
round
meters or
number.
16 and a half feet.
16 and a half, that's what it is. So you can go,
Yep.
you can put your cable limiters at 16 and a half feet. And cable
Right.
limiters are just for, fault currents.
Right.
They'll open up the circuit for a fault current.
Right.
And then you can go to 71 feet. So I thought they
Correct.
should change it back to American units so they weren't rounded off to
No,
like have to
Sean. No, no,
remember
no,
all
no. We're
these.
going to join the rest of the world. We got to do
Uh-huh,
this. One is we'll start off small. We'll start off with our
uh-huh.
codes. We got to join the rest of the world.
Okay, oui.
And then the electrical industry is going to lead the charge.
Uh-huh.
Um, so there's a good question that came in about this. So language in 2026 speaks to the distance being from the tap, the connection point, I would say, to the overcurrent device. Doesn't speak to the disconnect, question mark. It does talk about, I believe that is the language. I'm reading through it real quick. So we do have the conductor length. The key here, though, is in 705, there is a requirement that the overcurrent protection is either integrated to or directly adjacent to the disconnecting means. So even if we have this language that says, oh, this is to the overcurrent device, not the disconnect, the overcurrent device and the disconnect have to be either right on top of each other or one in the same device.
Married. Yeah.
So, all right. I see that I was so proud of us being so quick on time, but here we are almost at the top of the hour already. So, real quick, I want to be able to get our contact info up for folks. Really appreciate people joining. If you have interest in other courses, Sean mentioned HeatSpring, Mayfield Renewables. We also have courses on our own website. We're doing some Black Friday deals here, so really encourage people to go take a look at that. Go look at our website, see if there's courses that might be helpful for you. If you are interested in us next month, we are going to talk about community considerations for microgrid enablement. This is a talk that we did at our summit last month in October in Seattle. So really excited to have these folks back and talking about this. It's a really interesting topic, and it was very engaging with these folks. And so encourage people to join us again next month. And then finally, here's our contact info. Love to hear from people. Love to get questions, comments about this or other things. You can reach out to me directly. There's Sean's info as well. So again, thank you very much, Sean. I really appreciate it. It's been like you said, a long time coming. So I'm glad that you were able to carve out the time and share your knowledge with our audience.
Thank you so much, Ryan. I love being on your AMA, and hopefully we'll talk on my podcast or something and do more
We
things
definitely
together.
will. We
Yeah,
definitely will. So I look forward to that.
love being teaming up with you, Ryan. So thanks a
Awesome.
lot. Okay,
Cool. Thanks, everybody.
take
We'll
care.
see you on
Bye,
the next
everyone.
one.